So now be on your good behavior on camera.
Oh.
You're on camera all the time.
Well, I'll start the meeting. Nick Torello can't be here today. He's got a work schedule conflict. So I'll open with prayer and then Craig will do the introduction. Lord, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the fall weather. Cloudy as it may be, it's a comfortable day. Be with us as we hear about life as a leader of school systems. Be with all of us as we go through our workday and guide us in your love. Keep all those of us that are dealing with different health issues. Comfort those, guide them. Just thank you for the opportunity to get together in person as we deal with the best we can with dealing with the COVID and how we take care of ourselves in it. Ask that you bless this day. Amen.
Well, when Dave Goodale and I were putting together a directory for Tuesday Morning Fellowship a few years ago, I found a biography and thought, we've got to get this gentleman to speak to us. It was George Slick's career history. He earned a doctorate in education from Temple, taught high school social studies, then became an assistant principal, and in 1974 became superintendent of New Hope Solebury School District in Bucks County. In 1978, he became superintendent of schools for Wallingford Swarthmore School District, and he was there for 18 years. And when he retired, school districts kept bringing him back to serve as interim superintendent at Radnor, Marple Newtown, Wallingford, Swarthmore, and the Delaware County Intermediate Unit. Now he is happily retired, but he still serves as a consultant or leads seminars in a variety of educational management and decision-making capacities. It sounds like George knows schools and how to run them. And we asked him today to share with us his secrets on how you bring together teachers and students and school boards in one of America's most important social endeavors. So George, please tell us a little bit about your career.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I could have someone keep time for me, because I have a feeling that we're going to have a lot of questions about the condition of schools today and so forth at the end. So I want to leave some time for that without going over time. So if I get to 10:40, stop me, okay? I'm originally from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and you've probably heard of it because of the Johnstown flood. My great aunt Lottie lived through the big one, the 1889 flood. And throughout her life, she liked to talk about the Johnstown flood to anyone who would listen for as long as she wanted to talk. So when she died, she went to heaven. St. Peter said, we give you one request when you get here. What would you like? And she said, I would like everybody in the heavenly amphitheater, and I'd like to talk about the Johnstown flood for as long as I'd like. He said, 3 weeks, we'll have you there. So she got up in front of the heavenly amphitheater, and right before she was ready to talk, St. Peter went over to her ear and said, Lottie, remember, Noah's in the audience. The problem with talking about education is there are a lot of Noahs out there, but perhaps I can give you a little bit different perspective about it from the standpoint of the superintendent. Now, the first thing that a lot of people ask is, how do you get those jobs? Well, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and keep in mind, I haven't really worked for 13 years, so some of the things that I talk about that are legal standards may have changed, but I don't think so. The State Board of Education sets standards for education for the superintendent, and they authorize different schools and universities throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the nation, really, to meet their criteria for training superintendents so that they get a superintendent's letter of eligibility. That simply says you're eligible to be a superintendent. It doesn't make you one. What you have to do to get to be one is you have to get a school board to hire you. Once the school board hires you, you are sent to a judge and you swear an oath to uphold the school laws of Pennsylvania and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And you get what you call a superintendent's commission that's good for either 3, 4, or 5 years, depending on what the school board appointed you, and the length of time the school board appointed you. The difficulty with the whole process is that although you are actually a commissioned officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the school board has to hire you. So your loyalty and your oath is to the state, but your livelihood depends on 9 people on the school board. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there that sometimes causes problems, and I'll try to give you a few illustrations of that today. One of the first things that you learn as a superintendent is you have to develop an agenda for action by the school board on a regular basis. Most school boards meet twice a month. Sometimes they have a business meeting, and sometimes they have a work session before that. The agenda prep that I always used was based on 5 areas. The first one was business and finance. Second one was personnel. Third one was facilities and operation. Fourth one was curriculum instruction. And the fifth one was community relations. That structure was replicated. That was called the action agenda. And it included a write-up about the reasoning behind it and the recommended action by the committee in charge and the superintendent. Each of those topics had a committee of school board members that actually met before the meeting to determine what kind of action item would go on the agenda from their committee. This structure was also replicated in the information section of the agenda with all of those headings, and the administrators in charge of those areas had to write up a newspaper article for the information section of the agenda, because I don't really know, but most school board meetings are attended by reporters who are called stringers. And stringers get paid by the column inch. And I don't want to say they're lazy, but they don't always do a very good job. So I always said, if you write the article for them and put it in the information section of the agenda, they'll pick it up and print whatever you want. So, and that's pretty much what happened with the information section on the agenda. Now, I have a couple of metaphors for the superintendents. One of them, the best one, I think, is the superintendent is shepherd. The shepherd aspect of it is related to keeping the school board. And by the way, the name of this topic was supposed to be who's the boss, superintendent or the school board. The superintendent is pasture, superintendent is shepherd, is intended to keep the school board into the 4 pastures that are the most important. The school laws of Pennsylvania, the federal laws, and some of you may say, well, I thought education was a state function. It is. The problem with it is, since the federal laws were passed, each federal law that applies to education requires the state to pass what they call companion legislation that mirrors the federal law. So the federal law really has a very important impact on what happens in schools, because if the states do not pass companion legislation, they withhold funding for the various title programs, and even down as far as the school lunch program. They won't give you any funding for the school lunch program. So the state does in fact pass companion legislation. So you have state law, federal law, community mores and culture, and today that's very, very difficult to gauge, and we'll probably come to more of that later. And finally, school board policy. Now, I always tell people that in order to be a successful superintendent, you have to keep the school board in a policy pasture. That's why I think it's superintendent is shepherd. What happens if you don't, okay? School directors, and I don't mean, I've had a lot of wonderful school directors that I've worked with over the years, and I have very little bad to say about any of them, but they are often elected and dedicated to saving money. 78% of all school budgets are personnel costs, okay? So what do they tell you to do? The first thing, is there any way we can cut staff? Okay. So they want, and the teachers are the most important, and not only the most important, but the most expensive part of the budget, teachers and administrators. So they're looking to cut those. Now, if in fact they could do that, we would have a real mess. They are not, school directors are not allowed to make that decision on their own. The only way you can have reductions in staff is if the superintendent recommends it. That is in the school laws of Pennsylvania. And the superintendent is restricted in terms of reduction of staff to the extent that you have to have declining enrollment or you have to have a significant change in program. Now, somebody may say, well, what's a significant change in program? Well, when I started in education, in the administration, I started at Conestoga High School in Berwyn. We had what they call a comprehensive high school. They taught carpentry, they taught printing, and so forth and so on. And when the VOTEC schools came in, all that went by the boards, and all those functions were taken over by the VOTEC schools. So if you transferred that program to a VOTEC school, the teachers had to be transferred with it. And so you could reduce staff that way. Or if you changed your curricular program, and I like to use the industrial arts example, from industrial arts where you make, Bill Cosby used to say, whatnot shills, you had to make sure that you did that in a way that provided jobs for those people, if possible. But what happened in the industrial arts area is industrial arts pretty much shifted toward the technology emphasis. And so today, you won't find any industrial arts offerings in most high schools. They're technology offerings. If those teachers had other certifications, they could bump into those areas, whether they were good at it or not, okay? And that's a problem, but that is the law. If it was transferred to a VOTEC school, then the VOTEC school had to look at all of the different schools that were coming into their program and decide who had the most seniority to teach, let's say, auto mechanics or carpentry, if you will. And that's, so those things are important to know, that because a lot of people say, well, how do you determine who has a job and who doesn't? A lot of it is based on seniority and certification. Personnel examples, keeping them in the policy path. I had a colleague of mine call me once, who shall remain nameless, and school district who also remain nameless. And he said to me, George, the school board met the other night in personnel session, which is private, and told me not to hire anyone who had anything more than a bachelor's degree, and they didn't want to hire anybody with extensive credits beyond the lower end of the salary schedule, and they wanted me to hire nothing but rookies. What should I do? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I would do. I would go back to my office and I would draft a policy that basically says that, put it on the public agenda, and discuss that in public and see whether the school directors have the stomach to have that happen on the agenda. And he said, oh, I couldn't do that. I said, well, if you don't do it, I said, you're not going to last too long, because they don't need you if you don't lead. They can hire anybody that'll salute. So it wasn't too long after that he would leave and we hired another superintendent. I don't know whether he was any better or not, but anyway, I never saw anything in the newspaper about them having a policy to hire nothing but rookies. But those are the kinds of things that happen behind the scenes that if you're not careful and fall into a trap, you could look bad and have a bad system. When I was interviewed for the job at Wallingford, they asked me how I would hire teachers. And I told them, and they said to me, well, what if we have bad teachers? I said, well, if I hire a bad teacher, I'll be responsible for getting rid of them. I promise you that. And in the interim, if I find you have a lot of bad teachers, I will work on getting rid of them too. Because that's the key, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where everything happens in education. And when you look at that over time, people would say to me, are you doing that? And I say, yes, but you have to understand there's a continuum of excellence with teachers. You have star pluckers over here, you have plotters over here, and there's a continuum. So if you start lopping off the plotters and the incompetents, that continuum gets shorter, so that by the end of the day, the people in the middle, used to be in the middle, are now at the plotter end of the scale. And people say, when are you going to get rid of them? I said, well, they're not really that bad. They're just not star pluggers, okay? So you have to be careful about that. And some people say, well, you can't get rid of teachers. You can get rid of teachers. There are 3 reasons you can get rid of teachers. The 3 I's: incompetence, intemperance, and immorality. Those are the 3 reasons that you have to dismiss a teacher. The incompetence is a little more difficult to do, and if you do that way, you have to prove that you've tried to help that teacher through supervision, and you have to document that assistance. That's not the most difficult thing to do, but it's time consuming, and it often takes longer than you'd like. Intemperance is another one. A lot of people think that has to do with drinking. It does have to do with drinking and coming to the job with booze on your breath, and that's happened. But it also applies to cursing, bad language, doing things in the classroom that are intemperate. For instance, we had a teacher who taught sex education who was teaching the girls how to put condoms on cucumbers. So I transferred her from sex education to home economics in the middle school. And she came to school, the first day of school was a toque. So she was telling me, I don't like this job very much, but I didn't like her teaching sex education very much either. Anyway, so that's intemperance. I actually had an opportunity to sit in on another superintendent's meeting where he used the F-bomb with his staff, men and women. And I told him, you better be careful because you can lose your job for intemperance for talking that way. He said, do you think so? I said, I know so. So he did clean up his act a bit. In terms of immorality, I could give you a few examples of that, not too often, but we had one teacher who taught special education who had an affair with the daughter of one of his colleagues, and she was underage, and we had to dismiss him. If a teacher gets dismissed for immorality or intemperance, you can report them to the state board and they lose their rights to their pension. So that's a big factor for a lot of people. Okay, let's see. The best relationship with a school board, if you can do it, is to have a collegial relationship where people get along because they like each other and they respect each other. And one of my favorite sayings was, if you care for your school board, you must care for your school directors. And what does that mean? That means that you treat them all the same. You try not to develop any special friendships with them because that's poison. People see that and they think that you're friendly with this one, but not me, and so forth and so on. So I always told my administrators, you're fortunate, you have one boss. I have 9 bosses. And when you have 9 bosses, you have to be very, very careful about your interaction with them and what you do. And whenever I started out in this job in 1974, it's quite different. In fact, it was quite different when I retired in 1996. When I went back again to the other school districts that called me back as interim superintendent, I did tell them that I would not be the interim superintendent, I would be the superintendent, and get used to that because you're going to have to take it with the bark on. I don't care whether I work another day of my life. So I didn't have a whole lot of problems that way because I told them, gave it to them straight from the shoulder. The problem that I had was computers and the internet and email. And when they email you, they expect instantaneous answers. And when you give them an instantaneous answer, you're something like urinating off the end of the boat, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so I tried not to give them instantaneous answers. And I tried to give them all the same answers, but it got to the point when I went back, that it was all day long, internet, email. Give me an answer. I had to tell them, look, I will be here at 7 o'clock in the morning. I will answer any emails between 7 and 8:30. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if there's anything fresh, I will deal with them until I'm done. But in the meantime, during the day, I will not respond to your emails. So don't expect a response, because you end up being a clerk on the computer. That's what you end up being. And so that's how I handled it. But it was very, very difficult for me, because for years and years and years, I preached to my administrators, you can let your secretary do the computer work. You don't have to do it. I don't pay you for being a clerk. You make too much money to be a clerk. And so but it's different. It's different today. So you treat all equally and share all information equally. And when it came to the school board members, I had 3 do's: due process, due diligence, and due care. Due process stands by itself, because everything you do should follow a legal process or a well-established procedure that's set by the board in accordance with their policy. The policy statements are set by the board. The procedures that implement those policies are usually set by the administration, and that's where due process comes in. Due diligence is doing your job on a regular basis. And I hate to say it, but I know a lot of superintendents who sat in their office and read newspapers most of the day. I know superintendents who got to be very good golfers as superintendents. I chose not to do either of those things and practiced due diligence and got out into the schools and met people and tried to know what was going on a regular basis. I even played Santa Claus for a number of years. At Christmas time, went around all the schools in my Santa Claus suit, until the school board passed a policy of no religious affiliations of any type. And so I had to put away my Santa Claus suit and never do that again. But I missed it anyway. We had, at the time, they passed a religious neutrality policy. And at the time, I had 4.5 Christians and 4.5 Jews on the school board. One man had a Jewish parent on one side and a Christian parent on the other side. And so he was the one who said, 4.5 Christians and 4.5 Jews. So that was very interesting. But the Jewish community was very, very hot on not celebrating any sort of religion in schools, especially Christmas and Easter and so forth. So they did such things as spring break and winter break, and didn't call it Christmas break anymore. But one year, the rabbi invited me to go to Shalom down here in Wallingford to speak to his constituents about schools. And the question came up about celebrating Christmas in the schools. And I had a tendency to be a little bit abrupt. And so I told him, I said, look, I'll stop celebrating Christmas in the schools when Bill Gross and media takes the Santa Claus away from his school. It's his storefront. So because Bill Gross was a member of their congregation. Anyway, so they didn't appreciate that much. But in the end, we ended up with a religious neutrality policy. And I wasn't too hot on that either, but I didn't fight it, because one of the things I always said was we should be data driven. And we did a survey. You won't believe this. We surveyed the middle school population. How many different religions do you think we found in the school represented in that school of about 500-600 kids? Any guesses? 37 different religions. So I was quickly convinced that if we celebrated all the religious holidays, we wouldn't have much school. So I went along with the religious neutrality policy. The due care, I think I've mentioned that a little bit. That's basically trying to treat everybody alike, trying to give them all the same information at the same time. And that's very important. If you told somebody something here, and somebody told them the same thing here later, or a day or two later, say, why didn't I know about this yesterday? You know, that sort of thing goes on. So that is a very, very important element. Sounds stupid, due care, but it isn't. Whenever I was interviewed for the job, they asked me what I thought of the superintendency, and I told them I thought it was a poker game. And I'll never forget David Grove, who's also from Johnstown and a trial lawyer, said to me, that's kind of a cavalier attitude to take toward superintendency. I said, well, I think it's an accurate one, because when you become the superintendent of schools, it's like sitting down at a poker table. You have so many chips. And as you play the game, you spend chips and you win chips and you spend chips and you lose chips. Eventually, you reach the point where you have to say, I'm all in. Okay? That's why I thought it was like a poker game. Well, when does that happen? Well, I had T-shirts made for the school board, which I gave to them, that said no is an adult word. So I said no to them a lot. I won't tell you any lies. I said no when I felt my principles were at stake, and I had to say no to them. I'll give you an example. The mask mandate in New Jersey. The governor of New Jersey said we have a mask mandate for the schools. I saw in the news the other night that one of the superintendents, I forget where, said, well, the school board's going to have to address this as a policy issue. And if they decide that we are not going to obey the mask mandate from the governor, I will go along with them. Well, that's a good example of a superintendent saluting. That is absolutely wrong. And in Pennsylvania, you could lose your job if the state had the guts to come in and say, you're in violation of your oath, we're taking your job away. So that usually doesn't happen, but it could happen. But when I heard it on TV, I said to my wife, you could never do that in Pennsylvania and live with a good conscience with it. So I will say this because I do think some superintendents abandon leadership principles in favor of saluting the school board. And it's not to say that you don't respect the school board, but you have to be your own person. You have to maintain your principles. Otherwise, you're a loser. Let me give you an example. Whenever I start out in teaching in Pennsylvania, I taught for 2 years in North Jersey and Teaneck. It's one thing I didn't tell you. You have to be a teacher for 5 years before you get to be a superintendent too. I started teaching in Bensalem Township, and I was very naive. And I was there 2 years, I guess, and they were having an education association election, and the education association then was not classified as a union because they didn't have collective bargaining. So the leaders of the education association were having an election, and they only had one candidate. There's a woman from the middle school, Rita Schmidt, wonderful lady. So they asked me to run. I said, no, I don't want to run. They said, oh, no, we need to have somebody to oppose the other candidate, and we need to have an election. So I said, okay. So I ran, and they told me I won, but they cheated. I didn't find out they cheated until I became a superintendent of Wallingford. They cheated Rita out of the election by counting votes wrong. And because they didn't want a woman president. That's how it amounted to. And I was smart enough at the time to know I didn't know diddly squat about being the union president. So I went to Rita Schmidt and I said, well, can we do this together? And so we became very good colleagues, and we did a very good job together. And so we remained lifelong friends. Anyway, as I said, I was elected president of the BTEA, the Bensalem Township Education Association. And my counterpart in the Bristol Township Education Association was named Jim Middlesworth. And I got to know him from going to conventions and meetings and so forth. And next thing I know, I'm reading about the newspaper that the Bristol Township School Board president was under investigation for selling jobs. And Jim Middlesworth turned him in to the State Department of Education for selling jobs. End of the story. He actually went to prison for that because he was convicted. The reason I tell you this story is there was no way in the world that superintendent didn't know he was selling teacher jobs. And he said nothing. And that's very, very bad. That happens for people who have no principles, okay? And I'm sorry to say that, but there are some out there. So that's the Jim Middlesworth story. The other story I tell you, similar to that, is the Swarthmore football coach story. I wasn't in the job very long, and it came to me that the football coach from Swarthmore was having initiation for the freshman football players, where he would have them run a gauntlet, and they would take their hard plastic helmets, and as the freshmen ran the gauntlet, they would pound on them as they ran through the gauntlet, which was very, very dangerous. We had a conversation outside about how dangerous those helmets were. So I investigated that, found it was true, and it was happening for a number of years. And I terminated I called him in and said, best if you resigned. He resigned because I said, if you don't, it's going to be a cause 11 newspaper. So he resigned. After he resigned, two school board members from Swarthmore came to see me in my office and told me that I made a mistake. They wanted their football coach back. And I said, no, you're not getting your football coach back as long as I'm here. Well, we want our football coach back, and we want you to announce at the next meeting that you're going to rehire him. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, I'll tell you what I will do. If you get 5 votes to rehire him, I will give you my resignation on the spot, because that's how I feel about it. I'm not going to compromise my principles. So they left, and I never heard from that again. They never did bring it up in public. And the irony of that was that football coach went to University of New Mexico and got his doctorate. And by the way, you don't have to have a doctorate to be a superintendent. There are a lot of superintendents who are ABDs, all with dissertations. They have the coursework, but not the dissertation. They don't have a doctorate. He went to the University of New Mexico and got his doctorate in educational administration. He came back, and this was 10 years after I fired him. And eventually I hired him as a middle school principal. Because I knew he knew that I was serious about maintaining my principles. But it happened, a couple of my administrators said, I heard you hired Lazarus. He returned from the dead. But anyway, that's the story of the football coach. Now, it's okay to have 5 to 4 votes on part of the school board. And it's not a problem. No, in fact, very often I was wished happy birthday by a 5 to 4 vote. Anyway, but when school board members try to tell you what to do, and I had a lot of that happen. In fact, I had school board members who ran to get rid of me. One of them was a medical doctor from Penn and a researcher, and very, very celebrated. He called me a liar in public when we were closing Swarthmore High School. I wasn't lying about anything. He was on the board about 6 months, and he called me one night and said, George, I called to apologize. I said, why is that? Well, I called you a liar in public, and since I've begun to work with you, I know you never lied to us. And I'm sorry I ever did that. So I said, oh, thank you very much, Dr. So-and-so. I hung up, told my wife, I said, that's a nice thing about this job. You get called names in public and I apologize in private. So that happened. Now, when people would tell, what time is it, by the way?
34.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up then. Whenever school board members would try to tell me what to do, and whenever they would gang up on me and they had 5 votes, and I didn't like the 5 votes, I would tell them this story. The Pope died and went to heaven. When he went to heaven, St. Peter met him, and had said, here's where you're going to live. He showed him his grotto, stone bench bed, dripping walls and so forth. He said, that's where I'm going to live, returned. Yes. He said, well, if you don't mind, he said, can you take me on a tour of heaven so I can see some other living conditions up here? He said, yeah, it'll be a while. So about a month or two later, he took the Pope out on a tour, and they were touring heaven, and the Pope saw this beautiful brick Georgian mansion on the hillside in heaven. He said, who lives up there? He said, the superintendent of schools lives up there. He said, look, he said, I don't understand this. I was a Pope for all the Catholics in the world. And that guy up there living in that mansion is the superintendent of schools? St. Peter said, yes. He said, we have lots of popes in heaven, but we only have one superintendent of schools. so I hope someday we might have two. But anyway, that was an effective story. The other story I'd like to tell them was about the superintendent who was leaving because he was fired, and he saw his successor coming in the door, and he said, by the way, if you look in the lower right-hand desk drawer in your office, you'll find 3 envelopes that I left for you. But I would advise you not to open them until you absolutely need them. They're numbered 1, 2, and 3. So the superintendent said, thank you very much, and he was curious about it, but he didn't open them. And sooner or later, he had a budget problem that could have been the cause of the former superintendent. So he opened the first envelope and said, blame your predecessor. So he did. Okay. So then a year or so later, he had a strike. And so he better open the second envelope. So he opened the second envelope and said, blame the union. So he did, and he got through that. And shortly thereafter, he had another crisis, and he said, I guess I better open a third envelope. And he opened the third envelope and said, make 3 envelopes. Okay, I know some of you are probably curious about what's happening in the schools today. I haven't been there. I wouldn't want to be there. Just for the curiosity's sake, I looked up some things and found out that as of yesterday, before last night, the 3 superintendents from the 3 largest school districts in the nation, Los Angeles, the Chancellor of New York, and the Chicago school system, all retired or resigned during the pandemic. Last night I heard on the news that Bill Haidt from Philadelphia will not seek another term. So the pandemic has been very, very hard on superintendents. I don't know how much you've been following it in the news, but I'll entertain questions. I have another part of this that I could have given today, but I told Craig and Ted that I'd be willing to come back. The other topic is called achievement testing, good stuff or fluff. And that's really one that's dear to my heart, but I thought maybe you would be interested in kind of an overview of what it means to be a superintendent. So I'll entertain any questions that you have about current conditions and that sort of thing. Do you have any?
So
Yes.
to go back to the religious part, when you said
Right.
holidays and that sort of thing.
Right.
You know, my kids grew up in the Lower Merion School District.
Right.
You know, we Catholic, okay? So when they did away with Christmas and Easter and the Christmas trees in the hallways and
Right.
everything, fine. But up to this day, they've never done away with like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. They're still religious holidays. And why is that? I mean, we have to say winter break and spring break, but yet schools are closed, you know, with the Jewish holidays. What is the difference there?
It's basically the impact of the community, like I told you, community culture and mores. If you have a lot of people who are Jewish, they're going to control that. They're going to get to the school board and say, this is what we want you to do, and this should be your policy. The best thing about the religious neutrality policy is we didn't celebrate anything. So a lot of schools won't do that because they're afraid to do it. But the school board had the guts to do it, and it worked out very well, really.
Yeah, in Lower Merion, there are a lot of Jewish people. In
Oh, yes, I know it very well.
So my children decided to go to a Catholic high school.
Yeah,
So
right.
they could see, you know, the nativity scene and the Christmas
Yeah.
tree?
Well, that same night I told the audience in the synagogue about Bill Gross's Santa Claus outside his store. The other person on the agenda was Monsignor Stevenson from the Catholic school in Wallingford. And he stood up and he was telling everybody about the wonderful things the Catholic schools were doing. And so when he was done, I got up and I said, Monsignor Stevenson was telling you the absolute truth. They do wonderful things in the Catholic schools. And there's just one difference between the Catholic schools and the public schools. If you do something wrong in the Catholic schools, they can kick you out. If you do something wrong in the public schools, we have to be like Jesus, with our arms wide open and loving everybody. Monsignor Stevenson turned about 6 inches red. But it's true. I mean, even if you have a student who's disruptive, and particularly if they're disruptive in their special ed, you can't dismiss them for more than 10 days because they say that their behavior is a product of their disability. So I've had one young man who stabbed his teacher with a pencil, special ed. Had another young man who went up to the teacher and said, "I want to twist your nipples." The principal said, "You can't do mine because I had a double mastectomy." That's a true story, by the way. So you have all kinds of things like that happening. When I went back to Wallingford, the teachers at Wallingford Elementary School had a lot of special ed kids and we were causing lots of problems. And I developed a special ed protocol to help them as much as I could and do what I could do legally to get rid of their problems. But eventually I had to tell them, if you have a problem where a student stabs you with a pencil, my advice to you is to sue their parents in civil court, because that's a more effective remedy than I can ever do. So they were very surprised that I said that, but I did. Any other questions? You're not interested in what's happening in schools today? Okay, go ahead.
Do you feel there should be a cabinet position for education?
Well, there is.
I know there is, but
Yeah.
should there be? Should it have been created?
In terms of the federal laws where they can pass companion legislation, and they're required to pass companion legislation, yes, it's important, but it's pretty much ineffective in terms of what happens in schools on a daily basis. But they have to have somebody to apply the laws that they pass, and he's the guy that does it. So, I mean, we never paid much attention to the Secretary of Education. However, Arne Duncan, I'm sorry, I have to sit down because I had a proximal hip fracture a couple of years ago, and standing for a long period of time gets me. So try to sit down here a minute. I just take that out. Arne Duncan was on television not too long ago, and he said something that absolutely amazed me. He said, during the pandemic, we have lost 2.5 million school children on the rolls of the public schools. 2.5 million kids, they don't know where they are. Now, Detroit actually sent people out door to door to try to find them, and they found some, but not all. Now, I have to tell you, whenever I was a superintendent, I went to a number of futures conferences. And I went to futures conferences and I was very enamored with technology. And I had the opinion, incorrect opinion, that you could learn very well from computers and technology, maybe better than you could learn in a classroom. So I used to preach the school in the sky. I never really had any circumstance that proved me wrong until last year, when a lot of the students went to school by computer all year long, and it was an absolute disaster. My granddaughter taught at Christopher Dock Elementary School, and she told me she had to teach double because she had kids coming to class and kids on the computer. And their workload actually did in fact double. And my granddaughter, who went to school all year on a computer, had severe emotional problems, along with a lot of other kids had emotional problems because they didn't have any interaction with their friends and weren't allowed to have interaction with their friends. So I told my physician who was traveling in high school, I told him that story. I said, I was wrong. I said this I used to tell people that the only reason you have schools is to babysit kids and socialization. I said that I was dead wrong. It's very important to have the interaction that we have in public schools and what happens with teachers. So I'm glad to see kids are back in school, but my granddaughter, who was late in getting her shot, she wasn't fully vaccinated until last Thursday, was sent home and quarantined at least twice since school started in South Carolina. And many of her friends have been sent home and quarantined. And that's happening across the nation in terms of what's happening with schools and whether or not they have a mask mandate or whether or not they have a vaccination requirement for teachers. All those issues are out there and they are downright ugly when it comes to public school school board meetings. I don't know whether you've seen them on TV or not, but we've had circumstances where the school board members had to get police to take them out of the building because of the nastiness. And one lady I saw on TV, she yelled, "You can't shut me up. I have a right to say what I want and you have to listen." So, I mean, that's how it is. Yes, Dave.
I think when most of us went to public school, anything you did off school property was no concern of the school. Nowadays, with the internet and everything, if I heard of one instance where a kid went hunting with his father and he posed with his rifle and a dead elk or something, he got thrown out of school. It's now in loco parentis, I guess, in most schools. Do you have a comment on what's happening there?
Well, I don't know about the hunting incident, but in terms of behavior, again, I come back to policy. It's very important to have a discipline policy in the schools and to outline exactly what that discipline policy stands for and the procedures for implementing it, which sometimes require you to dismiss a student from school or suspend them from school for a period of time and even expel them. But you cannot expel a student without a hearing. Whenever I went to Conestoga High School, we had a shooting gallery in the basement. And students would come and they belonged to a rifle club and they shot in the basement in the shooting gallery. When I retired as superintendent, if you brought anything to school that even looked like a gun, you could be suspended. And I did suspend a student who brought a BB gun to school that looked like a Glock. And his father came in and told me that when he went to Radnor High School, they had a rifle club and they had rifles in the school and shooting in the school. So things have changed. When they passed the law that said if a student brings a weapon to school, you can suspend them. I had a long discussion with the school board because I said, okay, let's define a weapon. You can take a sharpened pencil and kill somebody with it. You can take a pen and kill somebody with it. Is that a weapon? And we decided it wasn't, okay? We had fans in one of the schools in the ceiling, and I had to send out a memo saying that you could not throw anything into those fans because if you threw a sharpened pencil into the fan and the fan blades hit somebody in the eye, you could blind them. So we also had I had 3 students who sat at the driveway off Brookhaven Road and shot the windows out of the school buses with a BB gun. And I did, in fact, suspend them from all activities for a year, and they went through it. I think a 10-day suspension, but they were suspended from all activities. And the one young man, one was a sophomore. The one young man actually grew up as a senior to be one of our best students and most well-behaved students. And as I saw his mother at graduation, I said, "I'm very proud to see the way your son turned out in terms of his performance in school since we met so long ago." She said, "Yes, no thanks to you." And I said, "Well, maybe just thanks to me, okay? Because if I wouldn't have done what I did, he may not have learned any lessons." But anyway, I don't know about the hunting incident, but let me tell you this. When I was in Wallingford, Swarthmore, we had a bunch of girls in middle school. And in those days, girls will be girls, but they would send dirty Kotexes and tampons to each other and call each other sluts and whores and so forth in writing, in letters and notes and so forth. And I had to deal with quite a number of those instances. And we resolved them all. But the difficulty today is a lot of that stuff happens surreptitiously on Snapchat and social media platforms, and they're calling each other names and telling each other to commit suicide. And when I was at Radnor, we did have a student who committed suicide as a result of another student telling her to commit suicide. So where do you draw the line in terms of, yes, that happened outside of school, it happened on her computer at home, but is it the school's responsibility to deal with it? Absolutely, I think it is. But it's a case-by-case situational type of thing that I think you have to use good judgment. And the schools are often placed in a situation where you have to do things. I had to suspend a third grader because he was holding up a noose to a black student in one of the Radnor elementary schools. And the mother of the black student came in to tell me that she thanked me for that because prior to that, no one had ever done anything like that. And she had a student in high school that was, her husband was white, she was black. And so I guess he looked like a Mexican, but she said the students, when they were in swimming class, were yelling at him, "Swim like you're going for the border." And nobody said anything to him. So she thanked me for doing what I did. But the parents of the third grader did not thank me, but I had to actually find another school for him. Another situation was we had a counselor in our school that had a friend in a neighboring school district, and a young man came to him and told him he had homosexual tendencies. And this counselor thought that the counselor in the other school could help him. And he didn't know that he was also a homosexual. He just said he didn't know it. And he sent him to him, and that counselor in the other school accosted this young man. And he came in to tell the counselor, "You sent me to a guy who did this to me." And so the counselor came to see me and said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Well, you have to tell his parents." Well, his parent was a single parent mother, no father. And we told his mother. He came to school Monday. That was a Friday afternoon. He came to school Monday with a butcher knife to kill the counselor, and chased him around his office and so forth. So I had to expel him. But when I expelled him, I had to find a place for him to go to school. And I had my friend in Radnor was Superintendent Radnor at the time. And the private schools wouldn't take him. No other school would take him. I had to call John the Flamis and say, "John, I need to find a place for this guy. This kid's had a bad deal. He's not a bad kid. Will you take him?" He said, "George, I'll take him, but if he gets anywhere out of line, you got him right back." I said, "That's a deal." So he went to Radnor and he graduated from Radnor. But you have to deal with those things. I mean, they're very, very difficult to deal with, and they're all situational. And I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but should we deal with some things that happen outside of school? It depends. Yes, I think we should do it sometimes.
On the outside of school activities, though, I think it was this year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on a Pennsylvania girl who was suspended from school for, I think it was bad language.
Bad
that
language,
she
yes.
used
Mhm.
outside of school.
Right.
And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in her favor that she had to be put back in school.
Right of free speech, yeah, they did. But I don't always agree with the Supreme Court. Yes, Wayne.
I went to Central High School in Philadelphia, Ogonsonoloty, when it was an all-boys school.
Okay.
And then the school district built a girls' high school, which we used to joke about saying the halls were lined with pink marble. But that was good. We were all boys, they were all girls, and then somewhere along the way, somebody decided that the girls at Girls High were not getting the quality education that Boys High were. So as far as I'm concerned, the standards at Central went to hell. Because once they let girls in, but at one time Central was the second highest rated public school in the entire country. What are your thoughts on single-sex education, the opportunity to have that?
If you want to have that, I think you should choose a private school. Because it's not going to work in the public schools ever again. So if that's what you want, believe me, you should select a private school that does it that way. I had a parent come to me because they didn't like our gifted program. Our gifted program was, for a while, was a pull-out program, what they call a pull-out program, where they took students out of the classroom who were gifted and gave them acceleration or enrichment. And we had a situation in Swarthmore where out of 20 students, 19 students were withdrawn and one was left to sit there. And I said, this cannot happen. What is that poor kid thinking? Okay, so we changed our whole program from acceleration to enrichment and included everyone, but we still had the acceleration for the gifted, but it wasn't a pull-out program. It was called the Renzulli model, and we used it. But I had the parent come to me and say, I don't like your program, and Marple Newtown has a better program. They pull out kids out and they give them acceleration. I finally said to her, Mr. Summons, if that's how you feel, I suggest you sell your house in Wallingford and buy a house in Marple Newtown. So that's that, and I did tell her that. I also had a woman come to the school board meeting about the gifted program and say in public, I don't like your gifted program. I want my child to go through a door that says gifted. I said, I knew her where she worked. So I said, Mrs. So-and-so, you do work in Philadelphia, do you not? Yes. You take a train to work? Yes. When you go to the training platform in Swarthmore, do you have a section for the gifted parents section to get on a train? No. I said, well, your son's going to have to learn to live in a world like that. So sorry to say, we're not going to have a door that says gifted. So, I mean, those are the kind of examples that I'm telling you, that you have to have principles and you have to have guts to say what you believe. And I never hesitated to do that. Sometimes I erred on the side of humanity, and I was told by one school board member when I expanded the cheering squad, because the principal put his daughter on the cheering squad as a sophomore and kicked 2 seniors off the squad. And so my solution was to expand the cheering squad, and I was told by the school board member that I had to start thinking with my head, not my heart. So I told him I thought he was wrong, but I never stopped thinking with my heart. Yes.
One more question, George. I didn't know that when you expel someone, you have to find another school to take them.
You do if they're under 21.
I didn't
Yes.
know that.
Yeah, it's absolutely law. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Over your career, have you seen the impact of broken families have more of an impact in learning?
Yes, it's really problematic. My son raised his daughter, she's 14 now, from age 1 by himself. He has full custody. His wife was a very loose, moral person, ran away with a neighbor and left him. But I know for a fact that it has an impact on their lives. I heard my granddaughter say, my daddy, my mommy, and my daddy. So hard on the kids, yeah. And it does have an impact on their learning. It has an impact when they're in high school and in middle school. I know my granddaughter was told by one of her friends, your mother's never going to see you again. And she's probably right, but she didn't need to say that to her. But that hurts kids when kids do it to each other. And kids can be mean to each other. And it will have an impact on their learning. So, have any of you seen what happens at these school board meetings? I had I maintained a friendship with the former solicitor from the Wallingford Swarthmore School District. He called me the other day, and his daughter-in-law is on the school board at Wallingford now. And he said, my son called me and said, Dad, he says, my wife said, you know what people are going to say before they say it when they get up to the microphone at a school board meeting. If they have a mask on, you can say, thank you very much, we know what you're thinking, and we appreciate it. If they don't have a mask on, we thank you very much, we know what you're thinking. So, anyway, but some of the school board meetings these days are very, very contentious and are causing teachers to quit, are causing superintendents to quit. And I hope that it soon gets better, but I'm not sure it's going to get better real quick. Anything else? I hope I wasn't too boring, but
I guess 2 announcements. There's no Zoom meeting next week because we're doing a field trip. The field trip's to Birmingham Friends Meeting House and Cemetery over on Birmingham Road. I think most of you know where it is. But you can either drive there directly for the 10 o'clock meeting, or you can meet here we'll leave at 9:45 and carpool over. Should be very interesting. That meeting house was there during the Battle of Brandywine on September 11th, 1777. And we're going to have a tour guide take us through the building, and if the weather's nice outside. Second announcement's about the train trip on October 17th. We have 28 people who expressed an interest. 15 have paid their money. So we still have 20 tickets left. I will be in the back of the room. If you've paid, I have your tickets for you. If you want to go on the trip, come see me. We'll get you down. Even if you don't have the money today, we'll put you down on the trip. Hopefully it'll be a very nice Sunday afternoon. Thankfully, there's no Eagles game. That's it. Let's get out there next week and see the Birmingham Meeting House. You have anything?
By the way, all the Spellmans are buried.
Okay, I'm going to close off the session, so let's, hi Nancy.
Thanks, George. I thought that would be interesting, and it was.
Was it?
Yeah. Fascinating. Have you run into the critical race